All right, I got a fun one for you guys today. It's a shorter one, but something totally different. Photographing black-crowned night herons at night. This was a really fun 2 outings that I did last winter when I spent some time in Florida. And I'm actually excited to get back to Florida and try some more with this. This came about, for anybody not familiar with this shoot from me, this came about from going and doing workshops in this area, and I arrived really early some of the mornings before I met my clients and noticed that these night herons were all kind of flying away from being out overnight, and they were kind of heading back to their roost. And so it dawned on me, I bet they're showing up, at night, hence night heron. And I wanted to see if I could photograph them in this place. And this spot in particular is a place where a lot of fishermen go. A lot of people are there all the time. So I kind of assume the birds are going to be a little bit more acclimated. It's also a spot that has a lot of urban lighting. So there's lights on a bridge right nearby that light up the area. There are lights from some buildings nearby. And then like in a shot like you see here, this top right image, there are lights that are a city miles away, really far away that you can play with. So basically a lot of different lighting options to play with. And it started out, I wanted to just shoot it with the existing urban lights that are there. So using the lighting that's on the bridge and the different lighting around. That was my first attempt. So we'll dive into that here and take a look. So this is what it was like. So I started out the first night with the 400 2.8, just thinking, give me a 2.8 lens. It's the fastest lens I have. It has the most reach. And so I don't have to get that close. I didn't know how close I'd be able to get. And I started roughly 45 minutes to an hour after sunset. So complete dark. There's no real ambient light happening here that's helping me out. And so I figured what I wanted to do personally was to sort of light these birds with the lighting that's there. Car headlights coming by. In fact, that's what this first shot was here. And listen, this is the set after I've gone through it. So there was a lot of trash, right? I threw out a lot of attempts here, as you can see, based on the shutter speed. So just to give you a little bit of behind the scenes of how I shot this. 400 2.8, Nikon Z9, all handheld. I didn't use a tripod, a monopod, just fully handheld. It was warmer water and weather, so thankfully I was able to get in the water, and half the time I was in, sometimes up to my waist, but usually like into my knees a little bit more, but sometimes I'd be like sitting down on my knees. And it was a little bit wavy too. It was higher tide on both of these outings, I think, or at least this first outing, it was definitely higher tide. And so this cove that I was in was right near an inlet on the ocean. And there was still like, not direct waves from like the ocean or anything, but there's some swell still coming in there. There was actually boats going in and out, so boat wakes would come in as well. And so you're kind of being like knocked around in the water. And if you've ever tried to do any kind of photography from in the water, you will know very quickly that it does not take much water movement. Tiny little waves are just enough to move your body around and cause like shaking and movement and stuff like that. A decent amount of the stuff I was able to autofocus, but a handful of it I had to go manual focus because it was just too dark for the autofocus to work. There wasn't enough of an edge or the light hitting the subject for me to make it work. All of these scenes look much brighter in the photos than they do to your eye. So, while you're looking at some of these images like this and you're like, yeah, it's kind of bright. I could see how you could focus on that. I exposed this much brighter than it really was to the eye. So that's this setup here. And so I just wanted to really play around and see what I could come up with and do. And so here we go. Like this is some of it. And all of these are no introduced light by me in this first set. So this is all the existing light that's there. It's all artificial light, but it's all the existing light that's there, and me just using different directions, shooting with front lit, side lit, back lit, stuff like that. And then occasional car headlights, shining lights, and causing some other different things to happen. So my goal most of the time was to try and find some interesting bokeh in the background. But I also wanted to show off the bird pretty well. And like you could see, like, look at that. So this is handheld. Let me let it render here. 25th of a second. at 4000 ISO. And like, so for me, it wasn't like, oh, let's get an image that's kind of sharp. Like I wanted truly sharp images. This is about as good as you're going to get, right? So that lens is incredible. That's one thing to say about it. And here's another one. I think if I let this render, you'll really get a good understanding of how sharp I wanted this. And here you go down to 1/10 of a second. Now this one's maybe not quite as sharp, and listen, we're never going to get like the fine detail here in this stuff, but you know, getting up on rocks, using my knee as a brace, bracing the camera on the rocks, things like that, and trying to get these shots. But it really gives a very different look to daytime shooting for sure, right? Down to 1/5 of a second, getting some shots there. Just really trying to play with the bokeh in the background and get some really interesting lighting effects, compositions, and stuff like that. So most of the time on this one, I was just trying to find birds that were up and exposed that could give me an interesting background, usually finding some sort of light back there. Or in this case, just blue sky. And then using the ambient lighting coming off of the bridge, the artificial light, to try and light up my subject. That's what a lot of this was. But then sometimes I would find this was shooting into it where I didn't have any ambient light on the subject, so I was using a little bit more silhouette effects and trying to do some different things like that. So I was trying to just play around with it in any way I could, trying to come up with some interesting stuff. This is light shining off from the other side of the inlet, reflecting onto the water in the inlet, and then me silhouetting the bird against that, getting a decent setting here, you know, down to 1250 ISO at 20th of a second. So this one was pretty easy to get some sharper photos, 30th of a second, 1600 ISO, and like some really like good, clean, quality, sharp photos. But, you know, this could easily be just like a sunset bokeh silhouette kind of thing, but this was all shot at night. Which is very different. And then stuff like this is playing more back into the sort of urban light kind of thing. Here's some other images I really like to do. This was backlit by I think this was the existing light there, but it may have been a car headlight that came through, because I'm kind of seeing like the yellow is just like the bridge light. So this may have been a car headlight that was kind of rim light illuminating them, but really neat to see the light kind of shining through the eye and everything like that. And you can see I definitely was pushing this one, right? 1/4 of a second at 16,000 ISO. But I'm gonna let this render. It's grainy, but like, look how sharp it is. Like the eye is really sharp. We get good lines out of it. And when you view the image full, the ISO, the noise, I'm sorry, isn't that bad. And I could do more noise reduction on it to get rid of it. Here's one of my favorites. I apologize if you guys can hear the rain. It just started downpouring here, of course, while I'm recording. But yeah, the lighting worked really well, and then had a different colored light in the background. So, and here's the straight out of camera on that. So these are the exposures I'm getting, and then I just worked it in post-processing to get it up to that point. So, you know, the details are there, the quality's there. It's just getting darker images to start out with sometimes. Yeah, just playing around with a bunch of different stuff. There we go, another 1/10 of a second. This is one of those that I think, if I'm not mistaken, is gonna be like really nice and sharp once you get in. And I was in the water for this one, getting shook around, beat up, and like, look at that. Like, tack sharp on the eye, right there. 1/10 of a second, handheld, 2.8 at 8,000 ISO. But again, I was always trying to find some lights in the background to do some stuff with. And the colors are all weird and wild and funky, but it was really fun. I really had fun with this project. So, after this night of shooting, so here we go. Here's straight out of camera, and here's the edit. So here's the other fun thing you get to do with stuff like this is you actually get to play around a lot with white balance, because the colors of the lights are all so different. They're throwing all kinds of different colors in there. On a shot like this one that I'm going to show you again, what I did in post is I white balanced for the bird. So if we go back to our photo here and look, you can see the bird is so yellow here, right? But if I do a proper white balance on him, the lights that are actively white in the background, which this is how the scene looked to my eye, by the way. This is pretty accurate to what it looked like, just kind of whitish lights, and then it was being front lit by a much more yellow light. But I knew if I white balance proper on him, these lights are going to go blue. So here we are, here's the switch. So I'm now into a proper white balance, nice clean white and gray on the bird, but it gets to throw that background lights into something crazy blue. So that's another really fun aspect of that style of shooting. So I wrapped up with a really nice portrait of this guy with some of these city lights. They were like, I'm talking miles away. I got to play around with them, and he was really cooperative, sat there. I had hoped he had faced me, but I only got like a side profile like that for a little bit, and then he moved on. But still able to get a bunch of really good shots there, and very happy with those. I don't know if that's from the first night. Yeah, I guess these are. Played around with some silhouette bokeh shots, trying some of this stuff out of focus so you can just see like the bill being repeated, like the shape of the bird being repeated and different stuff. And then again, back to some lit up shots there of this guy. Those were two different birds just kind of moving around that area. Oh, here's the last one. I like this one a lot too. So this is a juvenile I found sitting up on the rocks, again with those same city lights, but down to 1/4 of a second. And this is another one that kind of like amazes me how good the stabilization is on these lenses now that you can do stuff like this. I mean, look at that, 1/4 of a second handheld, and you're getting like sharp photos. Now, trust me, plenty of bad ones in there that were not quite sharp or not sharp at all, but get in steady, get a real stable posture, hold down the shutter for a nice burst of images, and just shoot right through it. And I just hold it down. I don't do like bursts, because every time I do that, it kind of shakes the camera more. So it's like, hold it down and burst it. I don't think I did the 20 frames a second kind of thing, just because I didn't want that many images to go through. But even at my normal 6 frames a second, which is usually how I have this camera set, it was plenty to give me enough sharp images in there. And I knew it was like a gamble, but you know, I knew if I could get some. So a couple nights later, or maybe the next night, I forget, I decided to go back, this time with a little bit more of a different plan. And it was all about adding a flash in. So this time I brought a flash on a light stand, and I had a remote trigger to be able to fire it off. Everything didn't work out for me because I didn't have the setup I normally would use where I could control the power of that flash. Just wasn't working for me anymore with the newer Nikon mirrorless system, so I had since upgraded everything. But I was able to put the flash out there, just put on manual power. Now, many of you may be like, oh man, you were flashing these birds at night, you're gonna mess with their vision. The flash was really far away at a really low power because I was still shooting really slow, in fact, much slower shutter speeds now. I needed very minimal power from that flash to light them up, and it was really far away, and I mean, the flash is so fast, right? So very minimal impact on the birds. I could see no discernible behavioral difference between them, like after I used the flash on them. And also I'm taking like a shot or two here and there. I'm not like lighting them up like flash, flash, flash. I'm not just firing away like crazy like that. But what this does is it allowed me to use rear curtain flash sync to freeze my subject at the end after I did some movement. And so I was able to shoot, now you're gonna see really long exposures, and move the lens around during the exposure, and then the flash fires at the end, pointed at my subject, and freezes them there. And that's, excuse me, that's what I did here, and was really excited. So here's just a little simple sideways movement. Here's the same thing with just swinging it all over the place. Some of these are gonna they're like a little too crazy for me even, but I kept them just as like concepts. Here's another one, swinging it around in circles during a 4-second exposure. But the interesting thing is you can see like even at the end, you get a sharp bird in that because of the flash firing there. And with that kind of thing like this, it's really hard to see. It's impossible to see because when you press the shutter, you're not seeing through the viewfinder anymore. Unlike a DSLR, I guess that's one downside of mirrorless, is during the exposure, you can't see through the viewfinder at all. So I can't tell where I'm moving stuff. Whereas a DSLR, oh, I guess the mirror would be up anyway, so you couldn't see on a DSLR anyway. So yeah, you can't see when you're taking the photo, unfortunately, which would be nice. Here's another one, 1.6 second exposure, and you can see how sharp that bird is at the end. But I also got like a ghosted image there because I probably held still a little too long, because there was a little bit of ambient light, which I required just to be able to focus on things. So trying to balance all that in the mix as well was fun. But yeah, just playing and like getting these different shapes. In this case, 24 to 120, zooming during it, which I don't know, what was I shooting? Oh, I guess all these are that lens. Yeah, 24 to 120. So I went with a little bit wider lens because I knew I could get a little bit closer. Yeah, zooming during the exposure. And just like moving it all over, 5-second exposures. Like I could basically kind of do whatever I wanted and then just lower the ISO to get the length of exposure. There's an 8-second exposure, and then look at the bird at the end. He's like totally sharp, right? Because there's very minimal ambient light on him, and then the flash freezes them at the end. So I was able to have a lot of fun, play around. I think that's straight out of camera for that one. There's the edit, and do some different stuff. And then I also realized I could maybe start trying to get some stars in there. So when I noticed like I could find the skyline and shoot wider, then I was able to do that with my flash off camera there. Again, trying to play around. This one had some movement during the exposure. This one I held pretty still, but I could only hold so still for a 3-second long exposure handheld. Oh, again, all of these are handheld. The only thing that's on a stand is the flash, which was on a tripod. So the rest of it is all handheld. Yeah, so this is the edit. That's straight out of camera. So I shot this one horizontal, didn't like the birds over there. But again, the white balance thing, I threw it way cooler and then just neutralized the white balance on the bird to get more of a blue in the sky, because the original was just kind of like a gray sky back there. So again, playing with white balance stuff. In hindsight, I would probably gel the flash with more of like a tungsten orangey gel, and that would allow me to do a proper white balance on the bird and then get that sort of blue in the sky without having to do as much in post, which would be nice. So the next time I try this project, I'll probably do something like that, because my new flash setup does have like built-in gels and stuff like that. Anyway, it was really fun I was trying to sneak in much closer. So these are, 65mm. You can see a lot shorter focal lengths than the first time out, but you can start to see a little bit of stars up there and a little bit more than a 1-second exposure, playing around with movement again. This set was really cool. You could see the stars up there quite a bit during a 2.5-second exposure. You can see all these birds just out there waiting around in the dark, and then this is another one that I was really happy with. You could really see the stars with this single guy, which I don't know. Yeah, no, there he is. They're straight out of camera. So that's exactly how it looked. And then there's what I did with the edit. Just brought a little bit more out of the sky, more of that blue-white balance kind of thing. But a really, really fun project, and one I want to work a lot more on in the future. Again, here's some of my favorites from that set. Let me get rid of this so you guys can see all that. And just something totally different that I really got to experiment a lot more with, which is really fun. I love trying this new stuff and getting weird with it as much as possible, and just trying to push the boundaries of what I can do. And I'm excited to get back and try it again. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and hope you join me for the next one.